The English word oak is apparently some 1,260 years old. The oak is said to have been the preferred tree of Zeus, and his followers are purported to have gathered and centered events around oak trees for this reason. It has been a symbol of strength and played a great part in the history of both house and shipbuilding for centuries, and is unusual in that its fruit, the acorn, is not named after the tree, but derived from Old Greek and Germanic words. Many of us, I'm sure, have happy memories of walks in the autumnal woods, picking up acorns simply because they looked and felt so nice, and somehow wishing we could do something useful with this beautiful little nut. The older generation would say how they used them in World War II to make coffee, of sorts, though they don't in fact contain caffeine. And Japanese school children apparently collected over 1 million tons of acorns to help feed the nation as rice and flour supplies dwindled. So I decided one day to see if anyone actually uses them today, and was interested to discover that apparently quite a lot of people do, though there are some steps to follow to make them desirable to eat. Acorns are quite nutritious, containing carbohydrates, fats, proteins, fiber, and a small quantity of ash and, of course, water, so can provide a substantial amount of calories. To separate acorns, first drop them into water and remove the ones that float, as these will not be suitable. Take the rest and pop them into a preheated oven at 150 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. Or alternatively, put them in the sun for a few days, the purpose being to dry them off and shrink the nut inside, thus making a little easier the job of shelling the nuts. Once shelled, the nuts need to be leached to draw out the tannic acid, which otherwise renders them very bitter to eat and upsetting for the digestive system. There are 3 ways to leach acorns. One way, not generally used, is to bury them whole in a riverbank for a year, which process turns them black and makes them sweet and good for the purpose of roasting. Another method is to grind them into coarse meal and soak in water, changing it frequently until the water stays clear, no longer becoming discolored with tannic acid. Processed in this way, the acorns tend to taste rather bland, but are good for further grinding when dry to make flour. The third way is to boil the acorns, but if this is not done correctly, this process will only bind the tannins to the acorn, causing them to retain their unpalatable bitterness, but it will extract the very nutritious oil from the nuts, thus reducing their value. To follow the boiling process, you will need 2 pots of boiling water. The acorns are dropped into 1 pot of already boiling water until the water darkens. The water is then poured off and the hot acorns dropped into the second pot of boiling water, while you refill the first pot with fresh water and bring it to the boil again. This process is repeated until the water remains clear. The boiled acorns should never be placed in cold water, but straight from 1 pot of boiling water into another. Putting boiled acorns into cold water will bind the tannins to the acorns, so they will retain their bitterness. Which is the preferred method? Temperatures above 165 degrees Fahrenheit will pre-cook the starch in the nuts, whereas cold processing will not. Thus cold water leached acorn flour will thicken when cooked, which is advantageous if you want to make acorn flour that will bind ingredients. Therefore, the way in which you would like to use the final product is important when deciding how to process the nuts. If you want to make snacks like roasted acorn kibbles, the boiling method will suffice, but if you wish to make acorn flour, then cold leaching is definitely the way forward. Acorn oil may be extracted by boiling large quantities of nuts until the oil is leached, whereupon it will float to the surface and can be skimmed off. And what of the tannic acid that you extract from the acorns? It may be used to dye clothing and also makes an effective laundry detergent, but will, however, not surprisingly, temporarily discolor whites. It is also antiviral and antiseptic and may be used to wash skin rashes and irritations, burns, cuts and abrasions. If you have a sore throat, you can even gargle with tannic water, or use it as a mild tea for diarrhea and dysentery. Externally, dark tannic water can be used on hemorrhoids. Hides soaked in tannic water make better leather clothing. Using the brown water turns hides tan-coloured, and that is why it is called tanning. and from where we get the words tannins and tannic. In traditional tanning methods, whole hides are soaked in a vat of tannin water for a full year before being processed. Oak trees begin to produce acorns at about 20 years old, but usually the first crop won't happen until the tree is about 50 years old. The average 100-year-old oak produces about 2,200 acorns per year. Only 1 in 10,000 will become a tree.